My parents always chose my sister over me, until she discovered I was worth $15 million and completely lost it at Thanksgiving dinner. Dad was left speechless. Can you imagine being invisible to your own family for your entire life, only for them to absolutely lose their minds when they discover you're secretly worth $15 million? Because that's my story. My name is Tanya, and for 32 years, I lived in my sister Audrey's shadow. My parents, James and Diana, saw her as the golden child, while I was always an afterthought. They never knew that while they were showering Audrey with praise, I was quietly building a fortune. And then, last Thanksgiving, my meticulously kept secret exploded over turkey and stuffing. Let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in suburban Boston, our middle-class family seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Dad was an insurance adjuster, Mom taught third grade. We had a nice colonial house, neat front yard. But inside those walls, the dynamic was anything but equal. Audrey, 2 years my senior, was the sun around which our family revolved. I remember flipping through photo albums, entire books dedicated to Audrey's first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. My milestones? Maybe a page or two, tacked onto the back of her albums, almost like a footnote. The favoritism showed in countless small ways, little paper cuts that accumulated over the years. When Audrey started dance lessons at 6, Mom and Dad were front row at every recital, flowers in hand, snapping dozens of photos. Our living room became a shrine to her dancing, trophies, framed pictures, everywhere. The summer I won the state science fair at 12, they skipped the ceremony because Audrey had a dance competition. My certificate ended up in a drawer, forgotten. Christmas mornings were the same painful story. Audrey unwrapped expensive, specific gifts she'd requested. I got practical items or generic presents that screamed no thought involved. 1 year still stings. Audrey, 14, got a beautiful white gold necklace with a sapphire pendant, matching her eyes. Me? A set of educational books about famous scientists. Don't get me wrong, I loved science, but the message was crystal clear. Audrey deserved beautiful things. I should focus on being practical. Even discipline was different. Audrey broke curfew? Got caught lying? A gentle conversation about choices. Me? Grounded immediately, extra chores piled on. The double standard was so blatant, even our neighbors commented. Audrey's room was redecorated every few years. Ballerinas, pop stars, a sophisticated teen retreat. My room? Same pale yellow walls, same basic furniture from elementary school through high school. When I asked to paint my walls dark blue in 8th grade, Mom said, "We don't have money for unnecessary changes right now." 2 weeks later, Audrey got a complete bedroom makeover. I learned early on that if I wanted any parental attention, it had to be through academic achievement. While Audrey was a B student who thrived socially, I pushed myself for straight A's. I joined every academic club, entered competitions, stayed up late studying. Their response? Distracted nods. That's nice, but don't you want to try something fun like your sister? The constant dismissal could have broken me. Instead, it forged something else. Fierce independence. By 13, I stopped looking for their approval. I taught myself to cook, managed my own schedule, found my own rides. I watched Audrey, still relying on them for everything, even homework help, well into high school. The one person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Elizabeth, my father's mother. Grandma Liz was sharp, no-nonsense, an accountant from an era when few women had careers. During my weekly visits, she'd ask detailed questions about my interests, listening intently. When I was 15, while baking cookies, she asked if I knew about compound interest. My head shake changed my life. She pulled out a pad of paper and showed me how money could grow. Over the next 3 years, she taught me everything about investing, saving, building wealth, lessons my parents never shared. "Your sister may be getting all the attention now," she once told me, "but you're the one with the mind for success. Remember, true wealth isn't flashy. The richest people in the room are rarely the ones showing it off." My high school graduation should have been a triumph. Valedictorian, full scholarship to State University's prestigious business program. As I gave my speech, I saw my father filming, but later found the video was mostly of Audrey reacting, not of me speaking. At my party, my parents spent most of the time gushing about Audrey's acceptance to an expensive private college, despite her mediocre grades. My accomplishments? A brief aside, oh, Tanya got that scholarship. She was always so practical. That night, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would build a life so successful it would be impossible to ignore. But a part of me wondered if I'd even want their recognition by then. Audrey went to Westfield, a private college costing over $40,000 a year. I went to State University on my full scholarship. The contrast was brutal. My parents helped Audrey furnish her dorm with new everything, drove 6 hours to move her in, and stayed the weekend. For me, my father dropped me off with 2 suitcases and a box of secondhand supplies. "Well, you've always been independent," he said. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. Call if you absolutely need anything." He was back in the car within 20 minutes, rushing home to prepare a care package for Audrey, who'd been at college for just 2 weeks and was already homesick. When I called home, they were always distracted, eager to tell me about Audrey's social life. When I mentioned my 4.0 GPA after midterms, my mother chirped, "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Audrey got invited to join the best sorority on campus?" Financial disparities grew starker. They contributed nothing to my education, reminding me I had a scholarship. For Audrey, full tuition, plus a monthly allowance. I worked 3 jobs, campus coffee shop, library, tutoring, to cover my expenses. Despite a packed schedule, I maintained perfect grades and started to shine in my business classes. My sophomore year, Professor Lambert, my financial analysis teacher, asked me to stay after class. "Miss Warren," he said, leaning against his desk, "I've been teaching for 25 years, and I rarely see the kind of aptitude for financial markets that you possess. Have you considered where you want to take this talent?" That conversation was a turning point. Professor Lambert became the mentor I'd always needed, introducing me to industry contacts, recommending me for competitive internships. The summer after my junior year, I landed a position at Maxwell Investments, working directly under their chief strategy officer. While Audrey was backpacking through Europe on my parents' dime, I was working 60-hour weeks, absorbing everything about investment strategies and market analysis. During my senior year, Grandma Liz passed away unexpectedly. Her death devastated me. My parents saw her as family. I had lost my champion, my mentor, the only person who ever fully believed in me. A month after the funeral, her attorney sent me a letter. She'd left me $50,000, her entire life savings. My parents were shocked. They'd expected her modest estate to be divided equally. "You should consider sharing that with your sister," my father suggested over dinner. "Audrey's thinking about grad school. That money could really help her." I stared at him, incredulous. Did Grandma Liz leave this money to Audrey? "No, but families should support each other," my mother chimed in. "Your sister has expensive dreams, and you always manage just fine on your own." For the first time in my life, I flatly refused. "This is my inheritance," I said, my voice firm. "From the one person who supported my goals. I'm using it exactly as she would have wanted." I invested every penny of that inheritance using Grandma Liz's principles. It became the seed money for my fortune. After graduation, I joined Blackstone Financial, living in a tiny studio with 3 roommates, spending nothing on luxuries, and investing 50% of every paycheck. I quickly developed a reputation for spotting opportunities others missed, researching emerging technologies before they became trendy. By 26, I had saved enough to take a calculated risk. I left Blackstone and started my own investment firm, TWW Strategic Partners. The name was intentionally neutral. I didn't want to broadcast that a young woman was at the helm. I focused on a specific niche: undervalued companies with innovative technologies and strong female leadership. My first major breakthrough came when I invested heavily in a woman-led biotech startup. When it was acquired the next year, my initial investment multiplied tenfold. By 27, my net worth crossed the $1 million threshold, and no one in my family had a clue. I moved to a comfortable, but not flashy, apartment in New York and limited contact with my family to holidays and occasional calls. During these interactions, their pattern never broke. Audrey, bouncing between marketing jobs, making an average salary, was praised endlessly for her creativity and social connections. My career was barely acknowledged. "It's nice you found stable work," my mother would say, though it sounds awfully boring. At family gatherings, relatives peppered Audrey with detailed questions about her life. I got generic inquiries. "Are you dating anyone?" When I mentioned my company was doing well, the conversation instantly swung back to Audrey, who was excited about a trip to Bali my parents were partially funding, even though she was 30. I stopped trying to share my successes. It was easier to create a fictional life, a regular finance job, regular hours, regular salary. It beat explaining the truth and watching their eyes glaze over, or worse, having them suddenly develop an interest in my life only because of money. Over the next 5 years, TWW's strategic partners grew from a one-woman operation to a boutique investment firm with 15 employees and over $200 million under management. My strategy combined analysis with calculated risk. I developed an algorithm that identified companies with strong fundamentals, but temporarily depressed stock prices. One of my biggest successes came from investing in renewable energy storage companies just before major policy shifts made the sector explode. Another windfall came from identifying a pattern in consumer technology adoption, leading me to invest in 3 obscure companies that were later acquired by tech giants. By 30, my net worth hit $5 million. By 32, it had tripled to $15 million, putting me firmly in the top 1% of Americans my age. I owned a stunning Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park, vacationed in exclusive resorts, and could afford anything I wanted. Not that I spent lavishly. Grandma Liz's lessons about quiet wealth stuck with me. Yet, to my family, I was still just Tanya, who worked in finance. I meticulously maintained the fiction, a separate phone for family calls, no social media posts about my business. When visiting my parents, I drove a rented Toyota, not my Tesla. I wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, hair in a ponytail, reinforcing the image of someone focused on work, not success. I had multiple reasons for this elaborate deception. First, fear. If they knew about my wealth, they'd ask for money, not for themselves, but for Audrey. Throughout our adult lives, they'd supported her financially through every challenge: apartment deposits, credit card debt, everything. Second, and perhaps more importantly, I didn't want to be suddenly valued only for my money after being overlooked my entire life. What would it say about our relationship if financial success was what finally earned me the attention and approval I'd been denied? The thought made me sick. Finally, years of emotional neglect had made me fiercely protective of my achievements. My success was mine alone, built without their support or encouragement. Some deep, wounded part of me didn't want to share it with the people who had never believed in me. In New York, I lived an entirely different life. I sat on tech startup boards, was featured in business publications, attended exclusive industry events. I owned designer clothing and fine jewelry that never saw the light of day around family. I dated successful men who understood ambition. My 2 lives never intersected, and I became adept at switching between them. Last Christmas was a perfect example. I flew home for 3 days, bringing modestly priced gifts, wearing simple jeans and sweaters. Dinner was a gush fest about Audrey's recent promotion to senior marketing manager, a position that probably paid less than I spent annually on business travel. "Isn't it wonderful?" my mother beamed, squeezing Audrey's hand. "And they gave her a $5,000 bonus." I nodded and smiled, not mentioning I donated 50 times that amount to a girls' coding initiative the previous week. When my father asked about my work, I gave a deliberately vague answer about projects going well, which prompted him to say, "Well, as long as you're stable, that's what matters." Not everyone needs to climb the corporate ladder. I was so accustomed to this dynamic, it rarely bothered me anymore, or so I told myself. But that changed when I met Michael. A successful architect with his own firm, Michael saw through my carefully constructed walls from our first date. After 3 months, he asked the question no one had bothered to ask before. Why do you downplay your success around your family? The question caught me off guard. We were having dinner at my apartment, and I'd just finished a phone call with my mother, deflecting job questions with intentionally boring responses. I don't downplay it, I said automatically. They just aren't interested in finance. Michael gave me a knowing look. Tanya, you're one of the most successful people I know. You manage hundreds of millions in assets. You've been profiled in Forbes, yet you just told your mother you had a normal day at the office checking spreadsheets. When I didn't respond, he continued more gently. I'm not judging you. I'm just curious why you hide such a huge part of yourself from them. That night, I told Michael the full story of my childhood, the years of emotional neglect. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he said something that resonated deeply. Living two separate lives must be exhausting. At some point, don't you want to just be your whole self? His questions stayed with me for weeks. As Thanksgiving approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't dramatically announce my wealth, but I would stop actively hiding it. I would bring Michael home, wear clothes I actually liked, and answer questions about my work honestly if asked. As a small step toward authenticity, I bought my parents a new television, a nice, but not extravagant model. It was something they needed. Their current TV was over 10 years old, and it was a tiny fraction of what I could actually afford. Still, it was more expensive than my usual generic gifts, and I felt both nervous and excited about this small step toward honesty. The drive from New York to Boston the Wednesday before Thanksgiving filled me with a familiar anxiety, despite Michael's reassuring presence. As we pulled onto my parents' street, I immediately noticed Audrey's new Audi in the driveway. A car I knew my parents had helped her finance, despite her supposed career success. Showtime, I muttered to Michael as we parked and gathered our bags. The TV, wrapped in tasteful silver paper with a blue bow, sat in the back seat. The moment we stepped through the front door, the family dynamic established itself with painful predictability. My mother rushed past me to hug Michael, thrilled to meet my successful boyfriend. My father gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder before calling out, "Audrey, Tanya is here." Audrey swept into the room like she was making a stage entrance. At 34, she still carried herself with the confident air of someone who'd been told her whole life she was special. Her dark blonde hair freshly highlighted, makeup flawless. "Tanya," she exclaimed, giving me a quick hug that barely made contact. Then she turned immediately to Michael, assessing him with obvious approval. "So, you're the famous Michael. Mom says you're an architect." While Michael handled the introductions with grace, I glanced around the living room. New photos of Audrey and her husband Brad dominated the mantel, including several from their Hawaiian vacation my parents had contributed to as an anniversary gift. I spotted exactly one photo of me, a 5-year-old graduation picture tucked on a side table. Dinner was a masterclass in subtle favoritism. My mother had prepared all of Audrey's favorite foods, including labor-intensive Swedish meatballs. When I offered to help, Mom waved me off. "No need, honey. Audrey already set the table so beautifully." The conversation revolved entirely around Audrey's recent promotion. She waved her hands dramatically, describing her new office with a window view and her team of 2 junior marketers. "It's just such a validation, you know," she said, sipping her wine. "All those years of networking and relationship building are finally paying off. They specifically told me my people skills were why I got the position." My parents nodded enthusiastically. When Brad mentioned the promotion came with only a modest raise, my father immediately jumped in, "Well, you know, we can help out if you need to upgrade some things for your new position." First impressions matter in business. No one asked about my work until dessert, when my mother turned to me and said, "And how's your job going?" "Tanya's still doing the spreadsheet thing." Before I could answer, Audrey jumped in. "She wouldn't know what to do with the promotion anyway," she laughed. "Remember how she always hated being the center of attention? She's happier behind a desk." Later that evening, I discovered Michael and I had been assigned the small guest room with the lumpy pull-out sofa, while Audrey and Brad got the master guest suite with the queen bed and attached bathroom. When I mentioned this to my mother, she seemed genuinely confused by my objection. Audrey and Brad are used to a certain standard of living, she explained. And you know your sister has back problems. Besides, you've always been less fussy about accommodations. That night, as Michael and I tried to get comfortable on the ancient sofa bed, he whispered, "Are they always like this?" "Actually, they're on better behavior because you're here," I replied, only half joking. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I overheard a conversation that confirmed nothing had changed despite my adult success. I was coming down the hallway when I heard my name in the kitchen. I paused, just out of sight. "I just don't understand why Tanya hasn't progressed more in her career," my mother was saying. "She was always so good at math and those analytical things." "Some people just don't have ambition," my father replied. "She's always been content with less, not like Audrey, always striving for more." Then Audrey sighed dramatically. "I feel bad for her sometimes. And now she's brought this really successful guy home." I Googled him, his architecture firm does huge projects. I give it 6 months before he realizes she's not at his level. I stood frozen. Their words cut deeper than they should have, given how often I'd heard similar sentiments. Michael found me there, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Let's go for a walk." Outside in the crisp November air, I finally let the tears fall. "It's been like this my whole life," I choked out. "Nothing I do is ever enough. And now they're pitying me because they think you're too successful for me." Michael stopped walking and turned to face me. "You know what I think? I think it's time they knew exactly who you're hiding." Later that afternoon, while helping my mother prepare the Thanksgiving meal, I took a business call I couldn't avoid. One of our major investments was finalizing, and my input was required. I stepped into the backyard for privacy, speaking confidently about million-dollar figures and strategy adjustments. I didn't realize Audrey had followed me outside until I ended the call and turned to find her standing by the back door, her expression suspicious. "Who is that?" she asked. Sounded pretty intense for someone who just does data entry or whatever. "Just work stuff," I said, attempting to move past her. She blocked my path. "Since when do data analysts talk about investment portfolios and 7-figure returns? What's your job, actually?" Before I could formulate a response, my mother called us both inside. Audrey gave me a long, calculating look before turning away. But I knew the conversation wasn't over. My carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel, and I felt both terrified and strangely relieved. The final thread snapped when Michael, making casual conversation with Brad, mentioned our upcoming trip to Tokyo. "Tanya has a new client there," he explained. "But we're extending the trip to explore the city. I've never been, but Tanya goes a few times a year for work." I saw Audrey's head snap up from across the room, her eyes narrowing as she processed this new information that contradicted everything I'd told them about my modest career. As we moved toward the dining room, I could feel the tension building like a thunderstorm on the horizon. The dining room looked like a scene from a traditional holiday movie. Mom had used her best tablecloth, the good china, the golden turkey perfectly centered. My father said a brief grace, thanking God for family and abundance. Words that felt strangely prophetic given what was about to unfold. The first 15 minutes proceeded pleasantly enough, with comments about the moist turkey and reminiscences. My mother directed most of her questions to Audrey and Brad, asking about kitchen renovations and starting a family. "Audrey just turned 34, Mom said, squeezing my sister's hand. "Plenty of time still, but grandchildren would be such a blessing." No one mentioned I was 32 and might also be considering family planning. Michael caught my eye across the cranberry sauce and gave me an encouraging smile. As initial hunger subsided and plates were being refilled, my father turned to Michael with genuine interest. "So, tell us more about this architecture firm of yours. Your website looks impressive. What kind of projects do you typically handle?" While Michael described a recent museum renovation, I slipped away to retrieve the wrapped television. Returning, I placed the large package against the wall and rejoined the table. "What's that?" my mother asked. "Just a little something for you and Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "An early Christmas present, but I thought you might enjoy it for the holiday football games." When dinner wound down, I brought the package to my parents. They looked surprised. My gifts were usually small, practical things under $50. My father tore away the wrapping paper to reveal a 55-inch smart television. Not the most expensive model, but a significant upgrade. His eyebrows shot up. "Tanya, this is too much," my mother said, confused. "This must have cost a fortune." "It was on sale," I lied instinctively, then caught myself. "Actually, it wasn't. I wanted to get you something nice." "How can you afford something like this?" my father asked, his tone somewhere between concerned and suspicious. "These are over $1,000. "I do all right at work," I said carefully. Audrey, who had been examining the box with narrowed eyes, pulled out her phone. The model number was visible. I realized with a sinking feeling what she was doing. $1,500, she announced after a quick search. "Tanya, that's more than a month's rent for some people. Since when can you afford gifts like this on a mid-level analyst salary?" I felt Michael's hand on my knee under the table, a silent show of support. Taking a deep breath, I decided to wade into the truth. "I've actually been doing very well at work," I began. "My company has expanded significantly, and I'm in a leadership position now." "Leadership?" Audrey snorted. "Last Christmas, you told us you were still doing the same job you'd started with." I simplified things, I admitted. "The truth is, I own my own investment firm. We're quite successful." A confused silence fell over the table. My father stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. My mother looked to Audrey for interpretation. "What are you talking about?" Audrey demanded. "You've never mentioned owning a company." While this uncomfortable conversation unfolded, Audrey's thumbs were flying across her phone. I realized she was Googling me. And unlike previous years, I had made no effort to ask professional publications to use my middle name or avoid photographs in recent profiles. The color drained from Audrey's face as she stared at her screen. Then, in a sudden movement that made everyone jump, she slammed her phone down on the table and stood up. "Tanya Warren, CEO of TWW Strategic Partners," she read from her screen, her voice rising with each word. "A boutique investment firm managing over $200 million in assets. Featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 Finance Edition, named one of New York's most influential women in business last year." She looked up, her face contorted with disbelief and growing rage. "All these years, you've been what? Secretly rich?" "While we've been struggling to make mortgage payments, and I had to beg Mom and Dad for help with our car loan." I remained calm, though my heart was pounding. "It's not a secret, exactly. It's just not something I discussed with family." "Not something you discussed?" Audrey was nearly screaming now. "You let us think you were some ordinary office worker while you're apparently worth." She glanced back at her phone, her eyes widening further. "Oh my God. $15 million. The dining room went completely silent. My father sat frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, utterly speechless. My mother made a small choking sound and reached for her water glass with a trembling hand. $15 million, Audrey repeated, her voice now a dangerous whisper. "All these years, Mom and Dad have been helping me while you sat on a fortune. How selfish can you possibly be?" The sheer unfairness of that accusation finally broke through my composed exterior. "Selfish," I responded, my voice level but intense. "I've been selfish?" "Yes, selfish." Audrey was in full meltdown, pacing beside the table. "Do you know what we could have done with that money? Brad and I have wanted to buy a house for years. Mom and Dad had to dip into their retirement to help us with basic expenses, and you're just hoarding millions." My parents were still shell-shocked, unable to intervene. "How much exactly do you have?" Audrey demanded. "Is it really $15 million? And you've never once offered to help your family? What kind of person does that make you?" Michael started to speak, but I placed my hand on his arm. This was my battle. "What kind of person does that make me?" I repeated, rising slowly to my feet. "Let me tell you exactly what kind of person I am, Audrey. I'm the kind of person who has been overlooked her entire life by her own family. I'm the daughter whose academic achievements were ignored while your dance recitals were treated like Broadway productions." I turned to my parents, whose expressions had shifted from shock to a dawning, uncomfortable realization. I'm the daughter who got used clothes while you got designer labels, who got educational books for Christmas while you got jewelry. I continued, my voice building. I'm the daughter who worked 3 jobs in college while you paid Audrey's full tuition and gave her spending money. I'm the child whose graduation speech you barely watched because you were too busy filming Audrey's reactions. I am the person who built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch, with no support, no encouragement, and not a single word of pride from either of you. Brad was staring at his plate, clearly mortified. My mother had tears streaming down her face. My father still hadn't spoken, his mouth slightly open, as if the words were stuck in his throat. And now, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion coursing through me, now that you've discovered I have money, suddenly I'm interesting. Suddenly I'm important enough to acknowledge. What does that say? About our family? Audrey seemed momentarily stunned by my response, but quickly recovered. This isn't about childhood petty jealousy, Tanya, she snapped. This is about basic family obligation. You owe us. I don't owe anyone anything, I replied. The money I have, I earned through my own hard work and strategic decisions. Just like the attention you received all our lives was something you never had to earn. It was simply given to you. That's completely different. Audrey shouted, her face flushed with anger. Mom and Dad were just being parents. Of course, they were proud of me. But money? Real money? That's something you share with family. Like you shared your parents' attention and love with me? I asked quietly. My mother finally found her voice. Tanya, we never meant to make you feel less loved, she said weakly. We just thought Audrey needed more support. You were always so capable, so independent. I was independent because I had to be, I replied. I was capable because no one else was going to do things for me. My father finally spoke, his voice a whisper. $15 million. How is that even possible? I made smart investments, I said simply. Starting with Grandma Liz's $50,000 that you wanted me to give to Audrey for grad school. Audrey wasn't finished. So, what happens now? She demanded. Are you going to help your family or continue being selfish? Brad and I could use a down payment for a house. Mom and Dad should be able to retire comfortably. That's what family does for each other. Michael, who had remained respectfully silent, finally spoke up. From what I've observed today, Tanya has been giving to this family her entire life, just not financially. Perhaps it's time someone gave something back to her, like basic respect. Nobody asked you. Audrey snapped at him. I think we're done here, I said, placing my napkin on the table. Michael and I will be staying at a hotel tonight. You're just going to walk out? Audrey was incredulous. After dropping this bomb on us? Typical Tanya, always thinking about herself. As I gathered my coat, I turned for one last look at my family. My father still seemed incapable of forming complete sentences. My mother was crying silently. Brad looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. And Audrey stood with her fists clenched, years of entitlement crashing against the sudden realization that her overlooked sister had surpassed her in the most tangible way society measures success. Thanksgiving dinner was over. The turkey half-eaten, the pumpkin pie untouched. As Michael and I walked to the door, I heard Audrey call after me, "This conversation isn't over, Tanya. You can't just hide your money from your family and pretend that's okay." But I was already stepping into the cool November air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The Marriott hotel room felt like a sanctuary after the explosive dinner. Michael ordered room service while I sat on the edge of the bed, alternating between bouts of relieved laughter and quiet disbelief. I can't believe that just happened, I said for perhaps the 10th time. Did you see my father's face? I have never, in 32 years, seen him speechless. Michael sat beside me, handing me a glass of wine. You were magnificent, he said. Completely dignified, while your sister had a full-blown tantrum over money that isn't hers. The aftermath began almost immediately. My phone buzzed with texts and calls, first from Audrey, then my mother, even Brad. I silenced it and placed it face down. They'll have to wait until tomorrow, I said. I'm emotionally exhausted. That night, curled against Michael's chest, I experienced a strange mix of emotions. There was sorrow for the family relationship I had never truly had, anger at years of dismissal, but predominantly, an overwhelming sense of release. The secret I'd carried for so long was finally out. And while the revelation had been chaotic, there was freedom in no longer hiding. Morning brought a flood of notifications. Audrey had sent 17 texts overnight, a roller coaster from furious, "How dare you walk out on us?" to apologetic, "I'm sorry I yelled, but you have to understand how shocking this was," to entitled, "We need to talk about how your money can help the family," and back to angry, "Your silence is so immature and selfish." My mother had called 4 times and left tearful voicemails. Brad sent a single awkward text apologizing for the disaster. My father had neither called nor texted. I was in the shower when a knock came at the door. Michael answered it to find my father standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face haggard. "I need to speak with my daughter," he said. I emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a hotel robe. "Dad," I said, surprised. "How did you find us?" "There's only 3 hotels in town," he replied. This was my second stop. "The Hilton sends their regards." The attempted humor fell flat. Michael excused himself to get coffee. My father sat heavily in the desk chair while I perched on the edge of the bed. For nearly a full minute, he said nothing, just stared at his hands. $15 million, he finally said, shaking his head. I still can't wrap my head around it. "It's not about the money, Dad," I said quietly. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "I know," he replied, surprising me. "It's about how we treated you. How we've always treated you." The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, justifications, even anger that I'd concealed my success. The admission nearly brought tears to my eyes. "I wasn't a good father to you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I told myself that Audrey needed more attention, more support, more everything. She was always so dramatic, so demanding. You were quiet, capable, smart. I thought that meant you needed less from us. But that wasn't fair to you." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, unwilling to soften the truth. "Your mother and we fell into a pattern early on. Audrey would cry and throw tantrums if she didn't get what she wanted. You would just adapt, find another way. We took the path of least resistance, and you suffered for it." He ran a hand over his face. "When you were 10, you won that science competition. Remember? You built that solar system model that actually moved. I was so proud, but I never told you. We had to leave early because Audrey was bored and making a scene." I remembered. I'd spent weeks on that project, carefully calculating, building a motor. I won first place, but my family had already left when they called my name. "There's been 1,000 moments like that," I said. 1,000 times when my achievements were brushed aside while Audrey's mediocrity was celebrated. He winced, but didn't argue. "You're right. And now you've become more successful than we could have imagined, and we missed it. We missed your whole journey. Would it have mattered if I wasn't successful?" I asked. "If I was just an ordinary analyst making a decent living, would we be having this conversation, or would Audrey still be the center of the family universe?" He had no answer for that. Our conversation was interrupted by my ringing phone. My mother calling again. I declined. Moments later, my father's phone rang. He answered, speaking in low tones, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "They're at the house," he said after hanging up. "Your mother and Audrey. They want to talk to you. All of us as a family, about my money, I guessed." He couldn't meet my eyes. That was answer enough. When Michael returned, I filled him in. "Is it worth going back there?" he asked, concerned. "You don't owe them another confrontation." I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to check out and drive straight back to New York. But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime seeking acknowledgement, wanted resolution. "I think I need to finish this," I said. "Set boundaries once and for all." Back at my parents' house, I found my mother and Audrey waiting. My mother rushed forward to hug me, but I stepped back. "Let's just talk," I said. Audrey had clearly been crying, but the set of her jaw told me she was far from accepting the situation. "I want to apologize for how I reacted yesterday," she began, her voice controlled. "It was a shock finding out my sister is secretly wealthy while we've been struggling." "I've watched you take family support your entire adult life," I replied. college tuition, help with rent, car payments, vacations. Even now, at 34, you expect mom and dad to subsidize your lifestyle. I never asked for or received a dime. That's different, she insisted. They offered that help because they love me. And because I didn't need it, I don't deserve the same love? I asked. My mother interjected, her voice pleading. We love you both the same, Tanya. We just showed it differently. You didn't show it to me at all, I said flatly. My entire childhood is a case study in favoritism. That's not fair, my mother protested. We were present for you too. Name one of my achievements that you celebrated as enthusiastically as Audrey's dance recital, I challenged. One time you put my needs before hers. The silence was damning. Audrey, growing frustrated, cut to her real concern. Look, what happened in the past is done. We're adults now. The question is, what are you going to do to help your family now that we know you can? The entitlement in her voice was staggering. Nothing, I said simply. She repeated, incredulous, nothing? You have $15 million and you're doing nothing for your family. What have you ever done for me? I asked. The sides compete for attention, dismiss my accomplishments, and now demand access to my money? That's what families do, Tanya, she nearly shouted. They support each other. Yes, they do, I agreed. But this isn't support you're asking for. It's entitlement to something you didn't earn. If mom and dad needed medical care or were losing their house, that's different. But you want my money because you think you deserve a better lifestyle than you've earned yourself. The conversation deteriorated from there. Audrey became increasingly hostile, alternating between guilt trips, outright demands, and finally threats to cut me out of the family if I didn't share my wealth. My mother wept and pleaded for peace while failing to address the core issues. My father sat in silence, occasionally attempting to moderate, but mostly looking defeated. After an hour of circular arguments that resolved nothing, Michael and I gathered our belongings and prepared to leave. As we headed for the door, my father followed us outside to the car. I'm sorry, he said simply. For everything. For 32 years of getting it wrong. I nodded, unable to formulate a response that encompassed the complexity of my feelings. We drove back to New York that afternoon, 3 days earlier than planned. During the long drive, Michael and I talked through everything. You handled that with incredible grace, he said as we crossed the state line. Most people would have either caved to the pressure or completely burned bridges. I don't know if the bridges aren't burned anyway, I sighed. I can't imagine Thanksgiving will be on the calendar next year. Maybe that's not a bad thing, he suggested gently. Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. The week after Thanksgiving brought continued fallout. My parents called daily, their approach slowly evolving from defending Audrey to acknowledging their role. My father, especially, seemed to be genuinely reflecting. I don't think I ever really saw you, he said during one call. I was so busy managing Audrey's needs that I missed who you actually were. I'm proud of you, Tanya. Not because of the money, but because you built something remarkable despite having parents who failed you. My mother struggled more to accept responsibility, often falling back on, but we loved you both, or Audrey just needed more attention. Still, I could sense a gradual shift in her perspective, small cracks in the narrative she'd maintained for decades. Audrey took a different approach. After several days of angry messages that I didn't respond to, she began reaching out to extended family, sharing a distorted version of events that cast me as a greedy, selfish sister who refused to help family in need. Cousins and aunts I barely spoke to started sending messages expressing disappointment in my materialism. I've never asked you for money before, wrote my cousin Stephanie, whom I hadn't seen in 5 years, but my son really wants to go to soccer camp this summer. And since you're obviously loaded. I deleted the messages without responding. The people who actually knew me understood. The ones who only reached out when money was involved confirmed exactly why I'd kept my success private for so long. 6 months after the Thanksgiving meltdown, spring brought new growth, both in the natural world and in my personal life. The immediate aftermath had been painful, but the enforced honesty had ultimately created space for healing, even if that healing looked different than I might have once hoped. I began seeing Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, a therapist specializing in family trauma, who helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my childhood and the recent confrontation. Your success triggered a family system that was built on specific roles, she explained. You were assigned the self-sufficient, overlooked child. Audrey was the needy, celebrated child. Your parents were the providers who focused their resources where they perceived the greatest need. When you revealed your success, you shattered those roles, and the entire family system destabilized. Through therapy, I came to understand that while I couldn't change my past or my family's behavior, I could set clear boundaries going forward. I drafted an email to my entire family outlining these boundaries. I would not discuss my finances, I would not provide funding for Audrey's lifestyle, and I would only participate in family gatherings where my achievements and personhood were respected equally to my sisters. The response to these boundaries varied dramatically. Audrey essentially cut contact, sending a final scathing message accusing me of destroying the family with my selfishness. I blocked her number the same day, a decision that brought immediate relief. My relationship with my parents evolved into something more limited, but also more honest. We spoke every few weeks, carefully avoiding topics that would trigger old patterns. My father made genuine efforts to show interest in my life and work, asking thoughtful questions and acknowledging my expertise. I truly didn't understand what you were building, he told me. I just assumed when you said finance, you meant some entry-level position pushing papers. I'm sorry I never asked for details. My mother found the adjustment more difficult. She continued to bring up Audrey, lamenting the rift between us and occasionally suggesting a financial gift from me might help heal the relationship. Mom, I said firmly, my relationship with Audrey was broken long before money entered the picture. I'm not using my resources to buy a fake sisterhood. After careful consideration, I did make one financial decision regarding my family. I established an educational trust fund for Audrey's children, my niece and nephew, that would cover their college expenses. The trust was structured so the money could only be used for education, with no possibility of Audrey accessing it. When I told my parents, my father expressed genuine gratitude. That's incredibly generous, Tanya, especially given everything that's happened. I love those kids, I replied simply. Their future shouldn't be limited by adult conflicts. My relationship with Michael deepened. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and most powerful, witnessing both the wounds of my childhood and the strength that developed in response. 6 months after Thanksgiving, he proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires, presenting a vintage emerald ring that couldn't have been more perfect. Do you think we'll have kids someday? He asked as we lay in bed that night. I think so, I replied, surprised by how much I wanted that future with him. But we'll do better than my parents did. We'll love each child for exactly who they are, not who needs us most. In many ways, the most profound healing came through building what Michael called my chosen family. My close friends, particularly those who'd known about my success all along, provided the unconditional support I never found at home. We celebrated holidays together, created new traditions, and built connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. Perhaps the most unexpected development was my changing relationship with money itself. For years, my wealth had been a secret source of validation, concrete proof that I'd succeeded despite my family's lack of faith. After the confrontation, I began to see it differently, not as a scorecard, but simply as a tool that provided security and options. I increased my philanthropic giving, focusing on organizations that supported young women in finance and technology. I mentored aspiring female entrepreneurs, sharing both knowledge and, in some cases, seed funding. The joy I found in helping others build their dreams far surpassed the hollow satisfaction of accumulating wealth in secret. By the time the next Thanksgiving approached, I had learned several profound lessons. First, honesty, while sometimes painful, is ultimately less exhausting than pretense. Living a double life had consumed enormous emotional energy that I could now direct toward more fulfilling pursuits. Second, money doesn't create character flaws, it reveals them. Those who had always valued me continued to do so regardless of my financial status. Those who suddenly showed interest when they learned of my wealth had always been transactional. Third, and most importantly, I learned that my worth was never dependent on my family's recognition. I had spent decades seeking validation from people who were constitutionally unable to provide it. That recognition had to come from within, from knowing my own value, regardless of external affirmation. The journey wasn't over, of course. Family systems don't transform overnight, and old wounds don't heal completely in a matter of months. But I had found a path forward that honored both my past experiences and my future possibilities. I had stopped allowing myself to be defined by what my family couldn't give me and started embracing what I could create for myself. I'll always be the girl who grew up in her sister's shadow, but I've also become the woman who stepped into her own light. And that, truly, is a story worth $15 million. So, tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes that Thanksgiving? Did I handle it right, or would you have approached it differently? I really want to hear what you think in the comments below.